Of all the human species that ever walked this planet, none are as fascinating as the Neanderthals. They weren't just cavemen with clubs. They were built like athletes, survived some of the harshest climates on Earth, and even passed on parts of themselves to us through DNA. So today, let's dive deep into what made Neanderthals absolute freaks of nature, and why, if they were alive today, they might just outcompete us in strength, survival, and maybe even brains. Oh, and before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, so YouTube knows this is a video worth sharing, and subscribe if you love exploring the strange and wild side of history. Neanderthals lived across Europe and parts of Asia between 400,000 and 40,000 years ago. That's hundreds of thousands of years of survival through brutal ice ages, predators bigger than trucks, and food shortages we can't even imagine today. What's fascinating is just how closely related they were to us. They weren't aliens, they weren't some weird side branch. They were basically our sister species. In fact, most people alive today carry around 1–2% Neanderthal DNA. So yes, a little piece of you might actually be Neanderthal. Quick question for you. If you've ever done a DNA test, did you find out you had Neanderthal ancestry? Drop your percentage in the comments. I'd love to compare. Now let's talk about their bodies. Neanderthals weren't tall giants like in fantasy movies. In fact, they averaged around 5'4" to 5'6". But here's the kicker. They were heavier, denser, and much more muscular than modern humans. Their bones were so thick that scientists say they were almost twice as strong as ours. Their chests were barrel-shaped. Their arms were packed with muscle, and their shoulders were wide enough to make them look like natural-born wrestlers. It's estimated that an average male could have weighed up to 180 pounds, but with a body fat percentage so low and muscle mass so high, they'd look absolutely ripped by today's standards. Some scientists even believe that without training, Neanderthal males could bench press over 500 pounds. To put that in perspective, that's more than most elite athletes today. If you think you could last more than 10 seconds in a wrestling match with a Neanderthal, smash that like button, because I highly doubt it. So why were they built this way? Because their lifestyle demanded it. Neanderthals didn't have bows and arrows or guns. They hunted face to face, using massive wooden spears to take down rhinos, giant deer, and even woolly mammoths, animals the size of modern elephants, but with thick fur and even more bulk. And here's where things get even crazier. Almost every Neanderthal skeleton found shows signs of trauma. Broken bones, healed fractures, even lost limbs. Scientists think up to 90% of them had serious injuries at some point in their lives. But they healed, which means they kept going back out to hunt, fight, and survive. Some of these wounds weren't even from animals. Evidence suggests Neanderthals may have fought each other just as fiercely as they battled nature. Do you think Neanderthals would survive if they had to face modern warfare, or would technology wipe them out instantly? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Now, it's easy to picture Neanderthals as muscle-bound brutes. But here's the twist. They also had massive brains. Their skulls were actually bigger than ours, with a capacity up to 30% larger. Of course, size doesn't always mean smarter, but they showed intelligence in other ways. They made tools, controlled fire, cared for the sick and elderly, and there's even evidence of symbolic art. They weren't mindless hunters. They were complex humans with culture and strategy, and their eyesight, probably sharper than ours, with bigger eye sockets suggesting better night vision. Imagine going hunting at dusk and seeing way more clearly than any modern human could. That's a serious advantage. So here's the fun part. What if Neanderthals had never gone extinct? Picture Olympic Games with Neanderthals competing. In weightlifting, wrestling, or short sprints, they'd probably crush us. But in marathons or endurance sports, not so much. Their bodies weren't built for long-distance running. At the same time, their massive caloric needs, up to 6,000 calories a day, might make modern life tricky. Imagine the grocery bill for a Neanderthal family. But with their intelligence, adaptability, and raw strength, it's hard not to wonder, would they be our rivals, or would they live side by side with us, maybe even blending into our society? Neanderthals were more than just ancient humans. They were survivors, athletes, innovators, and in many ways, superhuman. And the fact that some of their DNA still lives inside us today means their legacy continues. When you think of Neanderthals, you might picture them huddled in dark caves. But the truth is far more interesting. Yes, they used caves for shelter, especially during freezing winters. But they also built structures, huts made from wood, stone, and even mammoth bones. Some sites in Ukraine show circular dwellings built entirely out of mammoth skeletons, carefully arranged and likely covered with hides. That means Neanderthals weren't just cave dwellers. They were architects, adapting their homes to the environments around them. Surviving Ice Age Europe wasn't just about strength, it was about preparation. Neanderthals were expert firemakers. They controlled fire for warmth, cooking, and even protection from predators. Charred bones found at Neanderthal sites show that they roasted meat, making food easier to chew and digest. And let's not forget clothing. They didn't have sewing needles like we did later, but they used animal hides, scraped with stone tools, to make protective layers. Some researchers think they tied them together with sinew, creating primitive outfits that worked like fur-lined coats. Without fire and clothing, there's no way Neanderthals could have survived Ice Age winters, yet they did for hundreds of thousands of years. But survival came at a cost. Neanderthal bones show signs of arthritis, infections, and malnutrition. Many of them died young, with an average lifespan of only 30 to 40 years. Yet despite the hardships, they adapted. Some researchers believe Neanderthal DNA gave modern humans resistance to certain diseases, including pathogens we still deal with today. On the flip side, it may have also introduced genetic risks, like higher chances of allergies and autoimmune disorders. In other words, the health of modern humans is still shaped by our Neanderthal inheritance. Here's something fascinating. Neanderthals weren't completely isolated from us. When Homo sapiens migrated into Europe and Asia, the two groups met. And they didn't just compete, they mixed. We know this because of genetics. If you're from outside Africa, there's a 99% chance you carry Neanderthal DNA. That DNA influences things like skin tone, hair texture, and even how your immune system works. So in a way, we're not just descendants of Homo sapiens, we're hybrids. We carry the story of Neanderthals inside our very cells. Neanderthals were the first ancient humans ever discovered. In 1856, workers in Germany's Neander Valley stumbled upon strange bones. At first, people thought they belonged to a diseased human, or maybe even a deformed ape. It took years before scientists realized what they had found. A whole new branch of humanity. Since then, thousands of Neanderthal fossils have been uncovered, from Spain to Siberia. Each one reveals new details about how they lived and how close they were to us. For over a century, Neanderthals were painted as dumb, brutish cavemen. Popular culture gave us the image of hunched, grunting, hairy figures who barely survived. But modern science has completely overturned that picture. Neanderthals weren't primitive. They were strong, intelligent, creative, and compassionate. If one walked past you today, cleaned up and dressed, you might not even notice the difference. The real difference between us and them wasn't intelligence or strength. It was numbers, luck, and perhaps cooperation on a larger scale. So what's their legacy? It's in our DNA. It's in the tools they left behind. It's in the art painted deep in caves. And it's in the fact that, for hundreds of thousands of years, they endured some of the harshest conditions this planet has ever thrown at humans. They weren't a failed experiment. They were a success story, one that lasted far longer than our modern civilization has existed. And maybe that's the real lesson of the Neanderthals. Strength, intelligence, and creativity aren't enough on their own. Survival depends on adaptability, cooperation, and timing. The Neanderthals were not just cavemen. They were hunters, builders, healers, artists, and in many ways, they were us. So I'll leave you with this thought. If we met Neanderthals face to face today, would we embrace them as long-lost family, or would we see them as competition once again? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this journey into the lost world of the Neanderthals, don't forget to give this video a like. It helps more people discover the story. And make sure you're subscribed with the bell turned on, because I've got plenty more incredible history and science stories coming your way. Thanks for watching, and remember, the past isn't gone. It still lives within us.